Touch of Evil was intended to be Wells' return to mainstream Hollywood filmmaking after a decade spent in Europe, to shine on his wonderkin reputation having faded in the 17 years since Citizen Kane. Wells set about reminding Hollywood of his skills as a writer-director by taking on the weakest script he could find and turning it into a work with considerable power. However, this triumphant return to Hollywood was hampered by the fact that the studio hates Wells' final version of the film and recut the film before bringing in a second director and reshooting a number of scenes. In response, Wells wrote a 58-page memo to the studio detailing the changes he thought were needed. A version of the film based upon this memo was released, but not until 1988, 14 years after Wells' death. One of the most notable differences between the early versions and the 1998 memo-based version was that the early versions of the film ran credits over the film's 3-minute, 30-second opening take. The early versions also decided to run Henry Mancini's score over the scene instead of Wells' intended layer sounds, dueling radios, and street noise.
And if you're trying to scare me into calling him off, let me tell you something, Mr. Grandy. I may be scared, but he won't be.
This long take shows Wells at his most aggressively brilliant. Aside from the pacing and framing that perfectly ratchet up the growing sense of impending doom, Wells plays games with our expectations. As the shadowy bomber makes his way to the car, the camera follows him, shaking as he goes, suggesting the kind of subjective POV shot you get from handheld cameras. But then the camera bounds into the sky and begins to glide slowly and serenely above the decaying and vibrant streets. This use of a crane shot is reminiscent of the closing scene of Citizen Kane. There, too, it was used to gain a wide-angled impression of a complex thing. In Touch of Evil is the border town. In Citizen Kane, it was the extent of Kane's madness and his desperate attempts to fill the void left by the childhood and simple life he was deprived of.
Anyway, it wouldn't have explained anything. I don't think any word can explain a man's life. No, I guess Rosebud is just a piece in a jigsaw puzzle. A missing piece.
Another reason to adore this scene is that it tells you about the world the film inhabits. The border town's architecture hits at a long-gone age of grand city planning and civic ambition. The vaulted pavements of the border town are utterly at odds with the fly-boned shacks, and the old church is so beloved to the directors of westerns. Also worth noting is the lighting. Less obvious in this above clip from the original release of the film, the town does not have many street lights, and yet is full of light and incredibly long shadows, the kind of shadows that seem entirely appropriate for a film noir, such as Touch of Evil. Less abstractly, the scene perfectly juxtaposes the huge American cars of 1950s with the hand carts and the goat herds of the Mexican locals. The two inhabit the same world in the ramshackle nature of the border post, more concerned with greeting local celebrities and thinking of security or policing the flow of immigration, speaks of a border between America and Mexico that is entirely permeable, regardless of which side of the border the characters stand on. They are in the same world of long shadows, faded greatness, and dueling radio stations. While one might excuse the studio for its decision to play the credits over the opening scene, it is completely unforgivable that they decided to do away with Wells' soundscape. From the first moments of the scene, we are treated to rock and roll pulling from the unseen radio. As the car drives through the town and the camera's focus is shifted to different things, this soundtrack changes between different radio stations, different songs, different types of music. The layering of different sounds is one of Wells' better-known techniques. This is a radical departure from both cinematic and theatrical norms, where even crowd scenes tend to work on the assumption that the audience can only pay attention to one line of conversation at a time. In a tip of the hat to a naturalistic dialogue, Wells shattered this convention in the very first scene he appeared in his very first film.
How do you do, Mr. Thatcher?
Leland,
Hello.
Mr. Thatcher, my ex-guardian.
From Cuba.
We have no secrets from our readers, Mr. Bernstein. Mr. Thatcher is one of our most devoted readers.
No purchases, Mr. Lineker.
Hey, I got this...
You're American citizen, miss?
No, I got this ticking noise.
Yeah, okay.
No, really, this
Good night.
ticking noise in my head.
Just as Wells's use of layered dialogue conveyed energy, disagreement, and activity, the same can be said for Wells's carefully constructed soundscape. In addition to the street sounds and the few lines of dialogue, Wells presents us with a melting pot. Where the originally released version of the film came with one tune and one theme, Wells's version of the scene features different types of music from different radio stations from different countries, all competing for our attention. This layered soundtrack speaks to us of a place where national boundaries are purely academic, where different types of people from different cultures and with different aspirations rub against each other and compete for prominence. Without saying a word, Wells escorts us to a corner of the world that is nothing short of a melting pot. The use of this technique to convey a sense of place and time will be familiar to sci-fi fans for its use in Robert Zemeckis' Contact. In a long take, Zemeckis pans the camera backward from the cluttered airways of 20th century Earth, back through time and the waves of broadcast information, until we reach a point of deafening silence. Just as Wells' use of sound tells us who his characters are and what world they inhabit, so too does Zemeckis, driving home not only how vast the universe is, but how short human lifespans seem when measured up against the vast expanses between solar systems.
1941, a date which will live in...
And we continue this season's final edition of our Maxwell House Good News of 1930. Walter Winchell, good evening, Mr. North American. All the ships at sea, let's go to press.
Mike, do you realize this is the very first time we've been together in my country?
Do you realize I haven't kissed you in over an hour?
As an example of not only technical brilliance, this long take is also a masterclass in cinematic storytelling. Yes, the scene's few lines of dialogue serve to introduce us to two of the main characters, but the rest of the scene lets us know what kind of film we're in for, and what kind of place the film is about. The clashing radio stations not only preempt Wells' use of layered dialogue, they also foreshadow the film's central conflict between a young, cosmopolitan, and idealistic Mexican law enforcer and an old, provincial, and corrupt local cop. As an exemplar of how much information a skilled filmmaker can pack into a 3-minute and 30-second take, I think this scene is a perfect example of the importance of looking at film not only as one unit, but as a collection of smaller scenes and ideas, each with their own individual beauty.
Lane, I thought you were back in Washington.
I leave tomorrow. You know Schwartz, the local liaison.
You do, sir.
Hi.
Can you tell me who's in charge here?
I can't even tell you what happened. Why aren't you back in Mexico City? Isn't that dope trial coming up?
Brandy? It's Thursday. I'd hoped to go back in the morning plane, but no.
You mean this business?
I'm afraid so.
That bomb came from the Mexican side of the border.
The car did.